In a realm where empires were fashioned from blood and bone, few ruled with the iron-fisted brutality of Assyrian king Assurnasirpal II. Under his gaze, entire cities submitted not from choice, but from terror. Picture this: the acrid stench of charred wood mingles with the coppery tang of blood as flames crackle against breached city walls. Assurnasirpal's word was law, one carved into stone tablets, speaking of skin flayed and bodies impaled as dark trophies of power. Even the whispers of these deeds were enough to crumble rebellious wills. Join us as we unravel the grisly legacy of a king who built a fleeting empire on the screams of despair. Imagine a world teetering on the edge of chaos, where thrones were not as steady as they seemed, but leaned and tottered under the weight of betrayal and ambition. Into this turbulent arena of the ancient Assyrian Empire stepped Assurnasirpal II, a young king who emerged in 883 BC to a realm rife with rebellion. Rebellion was not just a whisper in the wind, but a relentless tempest trying to uproot his rule. Assurnasirpal, however, vowed not only to tame this storm, but to seize absolute control with the grip of an iron fist. His path to power was not just about governing, it was an assertion of unyielding ambition. Every city that dared rise against him was a stepping stone in consolidating his rule. Records speak of decisive brutality, of a rule chiselled from blood and cries of defiance. But to truly understand him, one must see beyond the crown. He was a man shaped by conflict, formed in the crucible of strife with a longing for immortality. Known for his imposing figure and piercing gaze, Assurnasirpal cultivated an aura of fear and respect, using art and imagery as psychological warfare to project his might far and wide. He was no king satisfied with mere maintenance of power. He possessed a relentless drive for more. His strategic mind was matched only by the ruthlessness of his actions. He was a stalwart believer in the divine right to rule with unquestioned authority. This belief permeated his governance and informed his military campaigns. The world he envisioned was vast and unyielding, as he set about expanding his dominion with both cunning and force. Inheriting a divided empire, Assurnasirpal faced a patchwork of city-states and territories, each on the verge of rebellion. The challenges were not nuisances, they indicated that the empire was vulnerable. His response was a ferocious quelling of uprisings, employing psychological and physical warfare to subdue cities once proud in their defiance. His armies were not just forces of conquest, but conveyors of terror, omens of doom for any who opposed. His legacy, a chilling declaration that defiance would meet unimaginable horrors, ensuring his realm remained docile under the Assyrian yoke. Assurnasirpal's resolve was not merely personal ambition, but the embodiment of Assyrian resilience. Raised amid the brutal politics of his father's court, he knew that power was something seized and fiercely guarded. Compromise was a flaw he could not entertain. His oppressive gestures were lessons too grotesque to forget, serving as public warnings to reinforce obedience through fear. And yet, his reign was one of strategic balance, brutality tempered with calculated clemency, fostering loyalty among allies and enforcers. His tenure became infamous, defined by campaigns that redrew the empire's boundaries. Expansion was not just a matter of conquest, but a strategy for hegemonic dominance. His armies, trusted and formidable, were designed to inspire dread. Each conquest left cities ravaged, citizens enslaved, walls decimated, leaders dispatched without mercy. His reign transformed the Assyrian identity, where empire meant not mere allegiance, but fear-induced subjugation. This relentless drive got the empire resources and strength, yet spread seeds of later dissent. Expansion required guile as much as aggression. He amassed wealth from conquered territories, adding to coffers and spurring further campaigns. His conquests fed an insatiable appetite for domination, a pursuit cast in the image of Assurnasirpal's own unyielding will. But the quicker the conquest, the swifter the seeds of unrest began to simmer beneath the surface. A strategist extraordinaire, Assurnasirpal's campaigns were masterpieces of tactical innovation. He relied on more than brute force, employing advancements in siegecraft and skillful soldiers to breach formidable defences. His military spectacles, grand and menacing, celebrated past victories while serving as future deterrents. Through vivid chronicles, he crafted a narrative of invincibility, embedding his legend in the psyche of his subjects and adversaries alike. Deep as his legacy runs, it is a tale not only of fear, but of consequences. The king cultivated not just lands, but an empire woven with dread, a legacy simultaneously feared and revered. His architectural endeavours, like the grand palace at Nimrud, testified to his ambition. But behind the marble and stone lay stories of tyranny that fueled both reverence and rebellion. His legacy warns of rule based primarily on fear, hinting at the impermanent nature of terror-backed power. While his regime expanded Assyria's reach, it also exposed it to vulnerabilities. The explicit brutality chronicled in inscriptions served as both deterrent and warning, a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom to any challengers, a narrative conditioning generations to fear Assyrian resolve. Yet his grip on power illuminated another truth. Terror may forge an empire, but seldom sustains it. For though his reign was one of cunning and conquest, Assurnasirpal's story remains a potent lesson in the cost and consequence of wielding fear as a ruling torch, flickering with the shadows he cast upon history's ever-unfolding tale. As dawn broke over the Mesopotamian plains, the ancient land stirred under the weight of a new power emerging. Assyria, led by its ruthless craftsman of fear, Assurnasirpal II. This was not merely a king, he shaped an empire with the relentless tools of terror. Where once there were scattered city-states along the Tigris, there now loomed a shadow stretching ever further with each victorious campaign. Assyria was whispered to be the epitome of dread, as Assurnasirpal understood that mere stories of his approaching forces could crush the spirits of his enemies more effectively than 1,000 swords. This fear was as much a masterpiece of innovation as it was an example of pure ruthlessness. While other empires sought loyalty through tribute, Assyria demanded submission through sheer intimidation. Word of Assurnasirpal's campaigns coursed like wildfire along trade routes, painting vivid pictures of his insurmountable might. It was clear: either open your gates willingly or watch them burn, your citizens at the mercy of unspeakable horrors. Assurnasirpal's campaigns were as psychological as they were physical. His armies didn't just fight, they were a living spectre of terror. As they encamped near city walls, the absence of noise was itself a weapon, a quiet promise of brutality gnawing at the psyche of those trapped inside. The heart of a besieged city felt the quiet before the showdown, unravelling morale like a fraying tapestry. The spectre of flaying knives and impaled bodies haunted dreams, eroding the unity of defenders before any real combat began. These sieges turned city defences into haunting stages of horror. Once symbols of pride and strength, city walls became canvases for grim displays, skins of vanquished leaders stretched and nailed to stone. This chilling mosaic served not only as a suppressor of rebellion, but stood as a perpetual testament to Assyrian supremacy. It's no wonder that many cities capitulated before any real fighting commenced. Stories of ghastly torments extracted from deserters etched fear into the hearts of entire populations. Assurnasirpal's terror extended into everyday life, becoming a ritual woven into the empire's very fabric. Terrifying displays weren't just tactics, they were ingrained into civic life. Public executions unfolded as grand theatre, and justice was swift and always public. It was an exercise in shared terror, ensuring every citizen internalized the perils of betrayal. This produced a society conditioned by fear, understanding that survival hinged on compliance. Life under Assyrian rule was a stark dichotomy, sharply contrasting depending on which side of the spear you were on. For those conquered, it was often brutal, a reality empty of any romanticised notions of sovereignty. Local customs were replaced with Assyrian edicts, and new gods were adopted, along with a foreign currency of fear. Yet, amid this oppressive atmosphere, there were glimmers of peace and prosperity for those who adapted, playing by Assyrian rules. While tribute flowed and silent compliance reigned, security was a fragile possibility. Resistance against Assurnasirpal was a gamble few dared to play. Cities that defied faced obliteration. Leaders faced brutal and public deaths to warn against future resistance. Defiant city leaders were marked for the most public, gruesome deaths, sending sharp messages to others who might consider rebellion. Entire lineages could evaporate as penance for defiance. Here, within this empire ruled by fear, the lesson was clear. Defiance was not just rebellion, but an invitation to a legacy of anguish. Despite the horror, Assurnasirpal's rule wasn't solely reviled. With power came admiration. His reign, though painted by terror, also commanded grudging respect. Neighbouring kingdoms found the Assyrian practices both cautionary and tempting. The disciplined might and psychological genius behind Assyrian conquests inspired some rulers, even if it made them shudder. It was a balancing act of fear, one that future empires would study with both awe and dread. Beneath these tactics lay the machinery that sustained Assyrian power. An efficient and sprawling administration network supplemented fear's grip. An intricate system of bureaucrats and governors ensured Assyrian demands were met, leveraging a structured efficiency beyond the chaos of conquest. Roads carried not only armies but dispatches that reflected an empire thriving within this precarious balance of terror and bureaucracy. All masterfully orchestrated by a king who turned fear into an enduring art form. Assurnasirpal left his mark on the land through monumental architecture, blurring the lines between grandiosity and dread. His construction stood as testaments to strength, casting long shadows over the terrain and reminding people of his authority. Towers soared like aspirations, and palaces loomed predatory over cities. Even as his reign ended, Assurnasirpal's legacy reached far beyond his era. It endures as both a caution and a reflection on the perils of unchecked power. Assurnasirpal's story is a complex tapestry, a dark strand weaving through human history. His reign is a reminder of the heights of dominion reached through fear and the inevitable falls that follow. From classrooms to whispers by firelight, Assurnasirpal remains a haunting presence. His legacy isn't just a relic of the past, but a chilling echo, a spectre gripping the throat of history. Even today, a relentless reminder of Assyrian terror. In the ancient world, siege warfare lay at the heart of Assyrian king Assurnasirpal. the second's relentless bid for dominance. Unlike any other ruler before, he transformed sieges from mere military operations into orchestras of psychological and physical manipulation. His forces would encircle a city, cutting off supplies, starving the morale of its defenders before a single drop of blood had been spilled. In those tense months, the looming presence of the Assyrian army served as a reminder of the doom patiently waiting. The art of the siege was an amalgam of patience and persistent terror, a strategy that gnawed at both body and spirit long before the final assault. An eerie chorus of battering rams repeatedly smashing against city gates was often the first note in this symphony of destruction. These were no ordinary logs, but towering beasts armoured in iron and kept slick with wet hides to repel fire arrows. Their rhythmic pounding, a relentless percussion, wore on the nerves of defenders. The anxiety of watching mighty gates shiver under this mechanical onslaught must have been crushing. Everything about these mobile juggernauts communicated inevitability. Escape was a distant dream, resistance a fleeting whim. While the ram sang its song of doom, above it all, archers perched on siege towers struck a visually dominant pose. These specialised platforms elevated warriors into the sky, providing vantage points from which arrows, some aflame, arced into the city below, causing chaos among defenders. Siege towers approached like mythical beasts from the horizon, shaking the earth as they bore death and fear. The pair, battering rams and archer-held towers, framed an unbeatable two-pronged strategy. Neither the height of walls nor the depth of resolve could withstand for long. Drawing closer, the whiff of smoke clogged with the scent of burning wood wafted heavily through the air. Fire, a tool of primal power, became a horror unleashed by Assurnasirpal's men. Wooden structures offered no sanctuary. Nightmares were ignited as fires spread, capturing defenders' imagination as much as their defences. The night sky blazed ominously, foreshadowing what awaited in the wake of Assyria's advance. The flames, a dance of destructive beauty, preached a sermon of despair and inevitability. Yet what lay beneath the crumbling edifice, a theatre unseen until its final act, were the tunnels. Sappers dug doggedly through the earth's flesh, undermining walls, planting charges, and waiting until the moment of collapse. This precarious endeavour, fraught with dangers and orchestrated with precision, highlighted a cruel twist. The ground beneath was as perilous an enemy as the armies at its gate. Even stone foundations found no solace, for where human strength faltered, Assyrian ingenuity persisted. Behind these grand tactics was a cadre of unsung engineers who conjured new methods of mechanical devastation. These artisans built and maintained the very tools that crush cities, crafting and innovating in equal measure. Their unseen hands steered the giant machines through invention, harnessing knowledge that transformed Assurnasirpal's ambitions into reality. Under guidance, each new device became a testament to human intellect turned toward war. The delicate balance of art and destruction told a story of spirits as indomitable as the rulers they served. While rams pounded and towers loomed, something ethereal lurked. Fear. Fear was Assurnasirpal's quietest soldier, trampling morale, rooting psychological defences before a siege even began. Stories, amplified and told in hushed tones across neighbouring lands, proclaimed savage tales of what awaited those who stood against Assyria. Tales of flayed bodies lashed to walls spread like wildfire, stoking a pervasive dread. Its potency was unmatched, a tool as powerful as any weapon wrought by human hands. A siege was also a complex dance of logistics, akin to an intricate play where every line must be remembered. Every actor, every piece of bread, each drop of water must appear on cue. Assurnasirpal's military relied on such precision to maintain the momentum of sieges lasting months. Supplies fed 1,000 mouths, sustaining an army deep in hostile lands. By keeping themselves nourished while depriving their foes, the Assyrians adopted a duality needed for sustained brilliance, importing prosperity, exporting desperation. The siege was a terrain of contrasts, where logistic ingenuity sang as much a melody of death as any blade. And then the final curtain. A great crescendo rose as the walls came tumbling down, surviving defenders facing the inevitable. Assyrian warriors surged in, an unstoppable tide, signifying more than defeat. They heralded a paradigm of consequence. Echoing through cities was the unspoken law of Assyrian conquest. Resistance promised ruin. What met the eyes of conquered foes was not just an army, but a living force of historical momentum, a harbinger of obliteration. The destruction left was a testament inscribed across rubble and ruin. It was the very legacy Assurnasirpal forged. Beyond empires built and fallen, the lessons of Assyrian siege tactics reverberated through ages, a testament to the collective might and minds bent upon conquest. Flaying someone alive, a method of punishment as ancient as it is horrifying, has lingered in the corridors of human history as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which rulers would go to maintain control. Assurnasirpal II, the Assyrian king infamously fond of this gruesome practice, wielded it not merely as punishment, but as a grand spectacle of psychological warfare. Imagine the methodical removal of one's skin, a slow dance between pain and shock that often led to an agonizing death. It was a daunting sight, delivering a clear, almost casual message of dominance. This was not just barbarity for its own sake, it was propaganda in its rawest form, a tactic to cow the heart of any city within earshot of Assyria's relentless grip. Assurnasirpal didn't invent flaying, it was already one of the oldest recorded punishments, yet he mastered its potential as a tool of fear. Targets were carefully chosen to amplify the strategy's terrifying echoes across time and space. The skins of the condemned were sometimes displayed on city walls, turning them into grotesque banners that silently shouted the fate awaiting defiance. These acts were backed by the king's inscriptions, relics of arrogance carved in stone that dared historians to judge him differently. In Assyria, the legend of royal cruelty wasn't just tolerated, it was integrated into the culture and became almost ritualistic. The king, born into a fierce dynasty, knew that ruling wasn't merely about governance, it was theatre, and fear was his script. Amidst burgeoning cities and loyal scribes, these acts were depicted not as singular failings, but rather systemic enforcements of power, designed to dissuade rebellion and insurrection. Engraved deeply into the psyche of his empire, they were less about personal malice and more about keeping the ship steady through waves of terror. Flaying transcended mere punishment, transforming into a declaration of authority. Its public execution was a calculated performance, designed to embed a visceral understanding of the king's absolute power over life and death. As victims were meticulously flayed, onlookers learned a simple truth. Resistance was not only futile, but guaranteed to end in horror. Under Assurnasirpal's reign, this form of terror became prophecy-making, with bloody, skinless bodies serving as symbols of totalitarian triumph in the most primal language. The justification lay deeply intertwined with Assyria's cultural ethos, a mix of divine mandate and brutal pragmatism. The king, seen as a god's representative on earth, used terror to maintain order. His cruelty was framed as divine retribution. To witnesses, these punishments weren't simply brutal. They were displays of the king's responsibility to purify chaos. An existence of fear was rationalized, justified as a means to achieve divine favor, maintaining societal stability in their cosmic order. The procedure of flaying was not for the faint of heart. It required a kind of twisted precision and stoicism from executioners, a dance between inflicting maximum dread and prolonging life. Watching helplessly as skin was separated from flesh, the audience internalized lesson after harrowing lesson, marking Assyria's pent-up power in visceral detail. For witnesses, it went beyond horror shows. These were indelible marks of the king's far-reaching sway, reminders that his terror could reach them at any whim. Fear grafted itself onto their very bones, making rebellion feel as far-fetched as escape. What remains of these acts are vivid accounts carved into the stones by scribes who served as witnesses to Assurnasirpal's brutal tactics. These records illuminate not only technical aspects of his reign, but also the chilling psychological impact. Flaying transformed from an act of punishment into narrative legend, woven into the empire's endless scripts of fear and submission. Each inscription, more than a mere boast, persists as a pulse of dread echoing through time. The public nature of these executions bore its own societal weight. Arranged to unfold before masses in bustling town centres, flaying executions evolved into grim performances that etched their way into collective memory. The proceedings were less about individual punishment and more about reinforcing the hierarchy and socio-political fabric. Yet this wasn't a phenomenon exclusive to Assyria. Other cultures, like the Aztecs and even some European societies, engaged in flaying for reasons ranging from religious to punitive. While Assurnasirpal wielded it as a foreboding signal of imperial power, others used it to solidify religious or cultural rituals. Despite disparate motivations, the technique universally carried an unnerving message. Through fear and flesh, control was absolute. Assurnasirpal II wielded flaying as an extension of psychological warfare, a game of dominance where the mind was often more at stake than the body. Even without witnessing, the mere threat was enough to keep empires at bay. Tales of such acts trickled down the generations, whispered through history as lessons learned. His calculated blend of dread ensured a branded image of a vengeful authority that stood the test of time. Yet, history prompted reflection. Lessons gleaned from Assurnasirpal's reign caution us about power's all-consuming nature, feared and unrestrained. More than past accounts, they're warnings against allowing brutality to masquerade as justice. They urge us to prize dignity and compassion, and to resist tyrannies veiled as necessary governance. From such darkness, a brighter quest emerges, one for governance that values humanity above all. Impalement stood as one of the most dreaded and grotesque punishments in the brutal arsenal of the Assyrian Empire, especially under the reign of Assurnasirpal II. He did not invent impalement, but he perfected it, turning this form of execution into a devastating spectacle that served as both punishment and a chilling message to all. To be hoisted onto a sharpened stake, left to writhe in agony, sometimes for days, was more than just a physical assault. It was a psychological weapon. Witnessing such a display, or merely knowing it could happen in one's own city, etched Assyrian dominance into the minds of all, an inescapable reminder that defiance came at the highest cost. This gruesome image, seared into the public consciousness, converted the conquered into docile subjects, their compliance shaped by fear. The method's impact was profound. It served as a stark deterrent, its horror lingering beyond death. Rebels knew that the consequences of defiance weren't just severe, but utterly demoralizing. Imprinted in the larger narrative of Assyrian military expeditions, this tactic wasn't just about immediate submission, but aimed at sustaining long-term control over captured territories. Inscribed in stone, Assurnasirpal's chronicles documented these acts, proudly proclaiming them as emblems of his unwavering authority. It wasn't shrouded in secrecy. Rather, it was heralded as a testament to his formidable reign. But Assurnasirpal didn't restrict his cruelty to impalement alone. His repertoire of violence was disturbingly inventive. Mutilation too became a vivid part of his legacy. Twisted forms of retribution saw prisoners losing ears, noses, or limbs, their mutilated forms paraded as living proof of their vanquished spirit. Such punishments were not merely physical, but struck at the core of identity and honour, cutting deeper than the flesh, severing an individual's standing in society, and leaving a lasting mark on all who bore witness. These acts, inscribed meticulously, narrated a catalogue of horrors designed to crush opposition. The psychological impact was vast, cascading through society. The spectres of impalement and mutilation loomed large, crafting a behavioural code that didn't discriminate between the conqueror and the conquered. Assurnasirpal wove a web where fear moderated behaviour, allowing his influence to linger, even where his soldiers did not physically reach. This terror wasn't just for the lower classes, it reached nobles and commoners alike. Such blatant displays of cruelty were a reminder of the king's indiscriminate reach. In this system, loyalty stemmed not from devotion, but from dread, silencing dissent before it even whispered. The stark differentiation in punishment between social classes was noteworthy. While extreme measures like impalement were accessible to anyone under Assurnasirpal's watchful eye, elite dissidents were often treated to excruciating public executions befitting their status. It showcased that no rank was immune. Conversely, the lower echelons faced subtler, yet equally effective suppression methods, like forced labour or public flogging, which stifled their societal ascent. By tailoring punitive measures to one's status, Assurnasirpal crafted a hierarchy of fear, quelling aristocratic insurgents with radical preemptive action and maintaining mass subjugation through a ceaseless climate of terror. Assurnasirpal took pride in engraving these gruesome tales in stone for eternity. These inscriptions were more than just records, they were powerful tools of propaganda. By etching his violent triumphs into the very walls of his cities, he crafted an enduring legacy, not meant for his era alone, but intended as a message across time. The inscriptions were not mere decor in his palaces and public buildings, but stark educational tools. They bore witness to Assyria's unwavering force. They emphasized memory's importance. Though a city might rebuild, the scars of Assyrian conquest could be reopened with a mere glance at those grim narratives immortalized in stone. Public punishment unfolded as a macabre theatre, drawing crowds for its spectacle. Watching an impalement or mutilation was entertainment for some, a forbidding lesson for others. This theatre was crucial, impressing upon the populace the king's ominous message and sealing it within their souls. These acts, by gathering public gazes, reinforced societal norms that thrived under fear, ironically uniting communities through shared ghastly experiences, while maintaining order through implicit threats. It was a grim social contract at work, obedience ensured survival. Dissent procured a dire fate. Under Assurnasirpal, honour and shame took on new forms, redefined by power and fear. To remain unscathed and preserve honour meant adhering to the crown, preventing shame from descending on one's family. These cultural manipulations entrenched obedience deeply, leveraging honour as a potent control tool. Leaders found both body and social prestige decimated in a single stroke, these acts symbolising more than punishment, but a slipping position of defiance in an unforgiving society. Yet in his reign's cruelty lay irony. While fear initially guaranteed obedience, it bred long-standing resentment, often sparking future revolts. History reveals that domination through fear is brittle. Assurnasirpal's reign exemplifies this paradox. Oppressed societies, though subdued externally, nurtured seeds of rebellion, waiting for the moment they could shrug off tyranny. His reign is remembered not for its power, but as a lesson in its fleeting nature. An empire that leaned too heavily on terror, destined to collapse under the weight of its own brutality. In the world of Assurnasirpal II, inscriptions were not just records, they were powerful tools of ancient propaganda. These stone-carved chronicles were far from subtle, etched for eternity to boast of unimaginable cruelties, as if they were triumphs. But what drove such a decision? For Assurnasirpal, these narratives served not just to cement his authority among subjects and enemies, but also to weave his reign into the grander tapestry of history. They positioned him as someone claiming divine favour and ruthless might. By showcasing his exploits, the king instilled a fear that transcended generations. As if inscribed in stone, not just to frighten and compel, but to echo forever. Defy Assyria, and this will be your fate. Yet within this chilling fear lay an odd blend of reverence. Inflicting dread to enforce compliance, the king's exaltation of violence demanded respect, even from his foes. Ancient beliefs held that such inscriptions could invoke divine protection, aligning the gods with Assurnasirpal's rule. Carved stones were conversations with higher powers, positioning him as a sovereign chosen by the divine. Even the most skeptical scribes and superstitious villagers couldn't deny the permanence of stone, more steadfast than parchment. Indeed, the king's grim litany resounded through time, proving that words etched in stone could wield a force more enduring than any sword. Scribes had the unenviable role of setting this grotesque dance of conquest and brutality into verse. These learned men crafted records, blending chilling facts with skilled poetry. On high steles and palace walls, they depicted the dark ordeals inflicted by Assurnasirpal's army. While some may see their curves and precise cuneiform as a testament to language's power, the reality was sobering. Scribes were chained to duty and survival, caught between interpreting horror and honouring their king's desire for intimidation. Their singular goal was to ensure future generations grasped Assyria's might, fearing its king long after he turned to dust. In bustling palace halls or quiet temples humming with incantations, these scribes transformed grotesque reality into legendary magnificence, using mythic language and dark prose. They likened the king to a lion, a storm, a divine wrath. The quill was no mere tool, it was ceremonial, bridging human brutality with divine justice. To these scribes, this delicate dance was preservation, ensuring their own contributions to history weren't forgotten. As ordinary citizens or enemies scanned these inscribed walls, they viewed them as tragic epics, relentless tales echoing across lands. These inscriptions outlasted cities, transforming history into immortalized memory. For a conquered people seeing the conqueror's exploits on their ruined homes, stone became a prison of subjugation. It was psychological warfare, where dread-filled messages haunted potential rebels. Stone inscriptions painted images grander than tales told around campfires. Here, art met warfare, forming a barricade of fear, and walls became artifacts of intimidation, whispering of a monarch who was, in effect, a force of nature. Assurnasirpal cast his shadow over all who encountered them, ensuring architecture itself sang his glory and terror. The unsettling irony within these inscriptions was their attempt at divine justification. Assurnasirpal claimed his brutal campaign served the divine, aligning his regime with heavenly endorsement. As the divine mouthpiece, he framed enemies as opposing celestial order. But was this genuine belief or strategic narrative? While scribes penned verses blending ethereal and bloodstained, the truth was painfully simple. Might was right. Common folk grappled with reconciling human cruelty and divine decree, left pondering whether it was godly approval or a ruler's hubris. These inscriptions were instruments of trauma, seeping fear into cultural memory of Assyria's subjects. Each etching reminded them that angering the king was a death warrant. Proclaiming transgressors' fates, these messages remained after the quake of Assyrian might. Their presence challenged perception, urging contemplation on humanity's history and how such artifacts warn of power's transient nature. What once proclaimed might now tell of power yielding to time. In an era where literacy was scarce, Assurnasirpal effectively used spoken word, allowing inscribed tales to travel and evolve, transforming terror to myth. His narrative was diplomacy, with fear as its emissary. Where swords ceased, stone spoke, sealing his reputation in the minds of distant realms. Over desert landscapes, through bustling streets, these inscriptions became cultural ciphers, unmasking facades with terror. His stories reached where raw power alone could not. Choosing stone over parchment for his legacy underscored Assurnasirpal's desire for immortality. While wind could carry away parchment, stone endured. This choice, rooted in foresight, ensured his narrative's resilience, stepping into the permanence of nature. Monuments rebuke oblivion and echo through ages, more steadfast than any memory or tradition. Inscriptions carried Assurnasirpal's legacy, resisting history's fickle hand, standing as silent guardians over lands he once ruled. These inscriptions reflect more than bloodlust. They open a window to the cultural ethos of antiquity, revealing how sovereignty intertwined with societal identity. They codified royal achievements and societal norms, glorifying violence and acknowledging its necessity. Through this narrative lens, civilizations wrestled with survival, justice, and faith. Assurnasirpal's inscriptions moved from decrees to societal mirrors, preserving values that straddle reverence and dominion, inviting reflection on human turmoil. As time enshrouds their original context, Assurnasirpal's inscriptions reverberate, bridging rock and memory's expanse. They reveal humanity's darker impulses, inviting us to consider meaning and legacy, past narratives etched in permanence and impermanence alike. In the time-worn grooves of Assyrian history, few stories chill the bones quite like those of King Assurnasirpal II, a ruler who transformed fear into an art form. He was a master of terror, wielding it like a craftsman would wield his finest tool. His empire was not built on brute strength alone. it was cemented by psychological mastery. Assurnasirpal's campaigns were more than battles. They were cautionary plays, staged with calculated brutality to echo into the farthest reaches of his realm. This atmosphere of dread seeped into daily life, tethering rebellious spirits to his iron will. This reign of fear wasn't a spontaneous outburst of violence. No, it was a deliberate and meticulous strategy. When Assurnasirpal's armies marched into new territories, they didn't just conquer, they created living pictures of horror. Ruined cities, mutilated bodies, cries of anguish carried by the winds. All these orchestrated elements were instruments in a grand opera of terror. Assurnasirpal was not merely a conqueror, he was a maestro, conducting a symphony that ensured his reputation reached places far beyond his physical conquests. The sight of the fallen served as grim storytellers, whispering the futility of resistance to all who dared listen. Amidst these visceral tactics were public executions, staged not in shadows but in the heart of bustling city centres. Each act of flaying, impaling, or mutilation was performed with a grim theatricality that left the audience frozen in a tableau of terror. Merchants halted their trades, conversations died mid-sentence as the king's brand of justice unfolded. These acts were not merely punitive, but instructive, inscribing stories of suffering and surrender upon the societal psyche. Travellers bore these tales, involuntary heralds of Assyrian horrors, spreading them across lands, ensuring that even the conquered could not forget. Assurnasirpal's true strength, however, lay not just in the physical might of his armies, but in a more insidious form of combat: psychological warfare. The mere rumour of his advance could dissolve resolve, prompting surrender before a single arrow flew. Fear conserved his army's strength, defeating adversaries in spirit long before battles began. By crafting an image of unmatched cruelty, he stifled uprisings and quelled murmurs of dissent, leaving towns to yield without resistance as his cruel whisperers spread dread as efficiently as any archer. Symbols became another language for Assurnasirpal's reign, a visible lexicon of fatalities and trophies. Conquered cities turned into grim galleries where skins, heads and bodies adorned walls, not simply as tokens of victory, but as ideograms of intimidation. These tangible relics went beyond mere decoration. They were woven into the physical and cultural architecture of Assyria, asserting that defiance had real, ominous consequences. Even Assyrian palaces carried this weight, with carvings and monuments proclaiming the king's achievements, portraying him as a near-mythical figure, ordained by fate to instill order through sheer terror. Assurnasirpal understood propaganda not just as messages, but as a tool of fear, carving his victories into the stone of fortifications and palaces. These inscriptions transformed his reign into a cautionary saga, embedding his narrative into the public consciousness. They were more than records, they were litanies of lessons, imbuing the landscape with a foreboding reminder that served to shape public behaviour long after his demise. His legacy of terror was thus immortalized, each carving a silent witness to the enduring power of fear. Although Assurnasirpal could not be everywhere, his presence was felt in every corner of his empire. His image was chiselled into statues, his decrees scattered strategically, creating an omnipresence that hovered over both peasant huts and royal courts. This vigilance ensured his dominion in territories he could not personally oversee. The idea that the king's reach extended into the very walls of every home instilled a dread that was as effective as any military patrol, binding subjects to a constant state of caution. Fear also maintained the loyalty of his own ranks, the chilling spectre of retribution, ensuring discipline was not only a matter of duty but survival. Those within his armies and administration knew well the fate of traitors and cowards. Through public and private displays of wrath, Assurnasirpal aligned the pursuit of self-preservation with unwavering fidelity to his rule. This atmosphere of fear muted dissent and cemented cohesion, weaving a strong fabric of loyalty that was as real as any chainmail. Resistance under his reign was a lesson branded into memory. Rebellion met not just swift defeat, but saw survivors subjected to ritualistic demonstrations of consequence. Communities that dared defy were sculpted into bastions of caution, emanating tales whispered across borders, reinforcing Assurnasirpal's dominance. His approach turned lessons learned by the few into deterrent law for the many, where rebellion was synonymous with ruin. Assurnasirpal's tactics went deeper than politics or warfare, embedding themselves into the fabric of Assyrian society itself. The legacy of fear transformed into cultural mores, tales that mothers recounted to admonish wayward children, solidifying the king's spectral presence across generations. Ritual and story reflected an empire bound by an unwritten yet omnipresent code of terror's omnipotence. Through such intricacies of fear, Assurnasirpal's legacy endured, a testament not only to his temporal power, but to fear's tenacious grip on the human spirit. His reign lingered as a spectral tale, one where fear's shadow stretched long into the future. Its echoes a chilling reminder of authority's darker avenues, forever influencing tides beyond its own time. In the Assyrian Empire under Assurnasirpal II, defying the king was a decision not taken lightly. Communities under his rule faced heavy tributes and harsh treatments that stirred their fundamental human urge for autonomy and dignity. To resist was to challenge not just his military might, but his divine right to rule. Those who dared to stand against him were often motivated by the slim chance of fleeting freedom over absolute subjugation, playing a high-stakes game that could end in absolute destruction. This rebellion was not just a military affront, it was a statement against the legitimacy of Assurnasirpal's rule. He responded with a chilling retribution that left lands desecrated and families obliterated, making the choice to rise both a silent protest and a loud cry for sovereignty. Captured rebels could expect no mercy. Their future was carefully orchestrated descent into darkness, a spectacle of horror crafted to resonate through ages. These brutal punishments were not merely to punish, but to annihilate, acting as vivid reminders that descent against Assyria would lead to a cascade of unimaginable suffering. Public executions were meticulously staged, ensuring the end of rebellion served as lessons for all witnesses, embedding fear into the consciousness of future generations. The screams of tortured leaders and the sight of their mutilated bodies became ceremonial tapestries of submission. This omnipresent deterrent ensured that no rebel, regardless of their status or cause, could escape a fate worse than death. Assurnasirpal's reign was marked by a strategic use of humiliation to discourage further acts of defiance. Defeated rebels were publicly shamed, often paraded through cities, or used as grotesque trophies in public squares. These acts extended fear beyond the battlefield, reaching into the very psyche of Assyrian subjects. The aim was to fracture social coherence, reinforcing the message that rebellion was futile. By ridiculing and torturing leaders, Assurnasirpal stripped any future rebels of symbols and heroes, perpetuating the idea that resistance would lead only to despair and destruction. But his retribution did not stop at the rebels themselves. Entire family lines were obliterated, as Assurnasirpal believed that kinship could be the seed of future defiance. To him, leaving any trace of a rebel's bloodline alive was akin to allowing the roots of future insurrections to flourish. Families were collectively punished, banned from their lands, enslaved or slaughtered. This strategy of eradicating kin ensured that the very memory of rebellion was erased, thus stifling hope for generations. The ghastly display of flayed and impaled bodies on city walls went beyond acts of vengeance. It was an art form of power, a constant reminder embedded in the environment itself. These gruesome monuments dictated everyday life, imprinting in the minds of those who dared to even dream of dissent that the king's shadow loomed large over their lives. This psychological warfare demonstrated Assurnasirpal's understanding that true subjugation came not only from physical conquest but from control over the human psyche. Assurnasirpal's acts enshrined him as a ruler who wielded fear with divine sanction. His legacy, carved into history, became a cautionary tale for future rulers, illustrating the potency of unsanctified violence. His reign was a testament to the delicate balance between governance and terror, a dance where fear was the dominant force. The echoes of his fury rippled through time, planting seeds for cycles of violence within conquered territories. While fear suppressed rebellion, it also bred an insidious defiance waiting beneath the surface. The brutal measures did not extinguish hope entirely. Rather, they seeded resistance through whispers of vengeance passed down through generations. Although each crushed rebellion led to further enslavement, it also sparked stories of courage and brief moments of victory, nurturing the enduring human desire for freedom. This paradox left behind a narrative tapestry filled with the colours of despair and perseverance. Assurnasirpal's unforgiving legacy burns within the annals of history, a lesson not easily forgotten. The cycles of rebellion he suppressed merged inception with annihilation, a dance where death tied closely to both its birth and demise. These historical reckonings were transcribed by survivors, their tales haunting the echoes of historical inquiry to this day. As we now explore Assurnasirpal's world, we grapple with understanding the balance between power, fear, and reformation, a balance that continues to challenge our perceptions of history and our place within its ever-turning wheel. In the wake of Assurnasirpal II's reign, a shadow loomed over his successors, an unsettling testament to the ruthless standard he had set for Assyrian kings. Emerging from the turbulent tides of his rule, new kings faced the daunting task of maintaining an empire born of brutality and fortified by fear. Assurnasirpal's legacy wasn't just vast territories and bountiful resources, it was the chilling reputation that preceded them, a reputation of terror that kept cities subjugated not in loyalty, but in dread. Yet within this austere framework, succeeding rulers found themselves at a crossroads. Their attempts to emulate Assurnasirpal's success, tempered with a need for a more nuanced approach. The chilling efficiency of his conquest was clear, but his reign also underscored the necessity of governance that balanced severity with diplomacy, leaving an indelible mark on policy-making and forcing kings to weigh the flames of ruthlessness against the cool balm of shrewd statesmanship. The ripple effects of Assurnasirpal's notoriety extended far beyond Assyria's borders, rippling through the neighbouring kingdoms. These tales of terror, of leaders flayed and city walls painted with the skin of the defiant, became tales whispered with a mix of awe and fear. His actions transformed Assyria into a spectre, casting a long shadow over the courts where rulers pondered whether to resist or submit. Paradoxically, in an attempt to match or deter Assyrian aggression, some neighbouring rulers began mirroring his methods, adopting a grim reflection of the very cruelty they feared. Thus, Assurnasirpal's influence seeped beyond his death, infiltrating not just political tactics, but also becoming a de facto template for power executed through terror. A grim doctrine of might as right, the cultural echoes of his reign permeated Assyrian art and literature, where brutality was immortalized in vivid reliefs and stone inscriptions. Palaces bore witness to these gruesome artifacts not just as decorations but as instruments of propaganda, a graphic reminder of insubordination's price. Yet this storytelling spillover into neighbouring lands painted Assyria in dual tones, a colossal menace and an enigmatic monolith. Art became a medium for subjected people to record their own narratives of Assyrian might, turning terror to art and resistance hidden in the brushstrokes. Through these echoes, Assurnasirpal inadvertently left a legacy that influenced artistic expression, political iconography, and instilled a vocabulary of fear across the Near Eastern landscape. Assurnasirpal had not only reshaped warfare into a monstrous engine of efficiency and fear, he had crafted a spectacle where the threat of his advancing army was often enough for cities to surrender instantly. His battlefield innovations became legacies of fear that ensured cities often capitulated before conflict ever unfolded. This transformation was a testament not only to his strategic acumen, but also to the intimidating prowess that other armies would attempt to emulate. For those trapped under Assyrian rule, life was lived under the oppressive weight of Assurnasirpal's reputation. Stories of his overwhelming might and ruthless retribution transformed into everyday life realities for those stripped of their sovereignty. Yet beneath the surface, resilience persisted. Some communities whispered their cultural traditions, harbouring flickers of identity. Resistance subdued yet alive, waiting for the right moment to rekindle their freedom. In these ways, Assurnasirpal's rule became a study of duality, a testament to power unyielding and a chronicled spirit of undying resistance. His historical reputation is wrapped in the tapestry of fear and reluctant awe. In the eyes of ancient chroniclers, Assurnasirpal's reign unfurled in sins and conquests alike, a paradox defining the Assyrian narrative. An intricate figure, he is immortalized both as a symbol of ruthless tyranny and as a harsh teacher of the delicate balance between power and cruelty, a warning woven into the ruins of an empire that spoke of transient command. Assurnasirpal's psychological impact on the ancient world was profound. His rule, told in whispers and lived in fear, reinforced the futility for many who dared to oppose him. The psychological ramifications were not merely for those who suffered. They lived on in the collective consciousness for generations, contrasting the futility of resistance with the longing for liberation. A dire reminder that peace under Assyrian rule was illusory, a mere lull in the cycle of submission. Scholars continue to unravel the underlying motivations and strategies of Assurnasirpal's approach, dissecting it for insights into leadership that wielded cruelty as a deliberate policy. His reign embodies lessons that delve beyond mere barbarity, presenting a case study in power dynamics, hegemonic survival, and the allure of tyranny that serves as a poignant reminder of history's dark allure. Ultimately, Assurnasirpal's legacy is a dual-edged sword, a stark reminder in modern times of tyranny's tempting grip. His history serves as a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and fierce governance, urging vigilance against the embrace of power wielded without mercy. His reign is more than a story of a brutal past. It's a narrative echoing through time, urging modern leaders to consider the weight of their actions. His tale is a compass that guides us through turbulent histories, reflecting both the allure and peril of tyranny. In the beginning, Assyria lay entangled in chaos, a kingdom shaken by unrest. It was into this turmoil that Assurnasirpal II arrived. Born into the royalty yet rising through sheer might and tenacity, he embraced this landscape as his battlefield. He saw possibilities where others saw only rebellion, recognising that fear could be the iron fist to forge an empire. And so, with eyes like flames and fists like steel, he vowed to crush all who opposed him. His vision was relentless, a brutal march across the heart of the ancient world, where cities quaked at mere whispers of his army. Yet it wasn't just the roar of battle that ensured his dominance. Assurnasirpal understood that the mind could be an even darker battleground than the field. The fear he instilled spread like a plague, rendering entire cities silent at just the mention of his approaching legions. The tales of his cruelty were eternal echoes, engraved in stone and whispered through generations, a ghostly presence that reminded every person of the iron fist that ruled them. He seemed to hold each city under a dark spell, a perpetual reminder of what waited for those who dared to resist. He was no accidental tyrant. His rule was a symphony composed in cruelty, conducted with calculated horror. The spectacle of skinning rebel leaders and displaying their remains on city walls was more than mere savagery. It was an artist's stroke, painting the empire's language of dominance. This gruesome theatre was propaganda in its purest form, ensuring that his name, whispered in marketplaces and palaces alike, evoked fear as sharp as battle cries. Despite the terrifying power this granted him, ruling by terror was a double-edged sword. Beneath Assurnasirpal's iron grip simmered the unending threat of revolt, a constant whisper of rebellion, coiled tight like a spring, ready to explode at the slightest sign of weakness. His empire was a formidable beast, vast and powerful, yet its foundations lay on a volatile bedrock of violence. Subjugated regions, scarred by their surrender, held only a hollow allegiance. Inside the empire's beating heart, mistrust festered, leaving the core as fragile as the provinces it so aggressively controlled. Assurnasirpal's successors donned his shadow like a mantle, inheriting not just his territories, but also his grim legacy. They ruled over lands marked deeply by the trauma of his reign, attempting to quell suspicion and forge unity from an empire still trembling at the ghostly echoes of its past horrors. With each new ruler, the whispered stories of his brutality became flickering memories, yet their impact endured, stretching across generations, colouring the cultural consciousness with a nuanced blend of fear and defiance. Delve into this history, and cautionary lessons emerge. Insights into how empires wielded power through sheer brutality, only to find themselves eventually undone by it. Assurnasirpal's empire, then, serves as a grim reminder that terror may forge a kingdom, but rarely can it sustain one. It illustrates the brittleness of fear-based rule, highlighting that the most terrifying reigns often lay the groundwork for their own undoing. Here we find whispered warnings etched in time, an ancient sound warning modern leaders of history's potential to repeat itself. Historians are torn, peering into a past veiled with myth and shadow. To some, Assurnasirpal is simply a tyrant, glorifying power for power's sake. Others argue that his actions, barbaric to modernise, were an acknowledgement of the brutal reality of the ancient world. These discussions are like distant echoes across the sands of time, forcing us to examine the fine line between despotism and necessity. Whatever perspective history ultimately attributes to him, Assurnasirpal's chilling narrative leaves an indelible mark on the chronicles of imperial power. Cultural reflections of his reign extend beyond dusty annals and stone carvings, finding vivid expression in the art and literature of those he conquered. Stories of tyranny, resistance, and enduring human spirit abound, richly woven into regional folklore. These tales, transcending the boundary between past and present, build a narrative of oppression and human resilience, constantly retold and reimagined across the centuries, through voices and hands crafting a new understanding of their shared past. The shadow of Assurnasirpal stretches not only across his time but through history, echoing in the rise and fall of countless empires that followed similar paths of conquest and control. Parallels exist in the iron-fisted expansions of Rome and the Mongolian incursions, where brutal methods ultimately led to fracturing from within. Here lies the universal story, where empires built from blood and fear rise spectacularly with daunting strength, only to fall as their momentary glory crumbles beneath the weight of unsustainable terror. As we reflect on Assurnasirpal's legacy, one cannot escape his unyielding warning, a testament to the dangers of domination through fear. History has shown us, time and time again, that while fear might consolidate power, it rarely sustains it. His rule, an eerie combination of dread and authority, presses upon us the reminder that real and lasting stability comes not from tyranny, but from foresight and wisdom. Greatness achieved through fear is at best a fleeting mirage, its edges shadowed by the creeping inevitability of collapse. Thus, as Assurnasirpal's story concludes, it leaves us pondering the delicate balance of power, a reflection that stretches far beyond his haunted reign. If you found this dive into the eerie and extraordinary world of Assurnasirpal II as captivating as we aim for it to be, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more strange tales from history's shadowed corners.